So, hello and welcome to Tell Us Your Effing Story, a podcast by franchisors for franchisors, where we go behind the scenes and get down and dirty. Oh, that's not the right word. Interesting characters in the Australian franchise sector. I'm the host, Bruce McFarlane, with my co-host, John Sully. Today we're speaking with John Cooksey, the CEO of BDC Talent. So, how are you, John?
I'm good, thanks. How you going?
Good, the Cooksey man. Are you
Good
ready?
to see you, John. Absolutely.
All righto, tell us your fucking story.
John,
Yes.
it's franchising story, not
Sorry.
fucking story.
Got it. All right. Okay, I'm with you.
Sorry, JC.
That's okay, no problem.
Righto, give us some background, mate. Where are you from? What's your story?
Yeah, look, grew up in New South Wales, actually in the country for a couple of years. So my father was a teacher, so he worked around country New South Wales. We grew up.
Whereabouts? Where were you?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, not far from, close-ish to Canberra, but could have been a million miles from Canberra, really.
The road from Wagga.
Yeah, exactly. So born there, and then we moved to the Sutherland Shire in Sydney. Lived there for 20-odd years, what they call it, God's country or something. But it's having not lived there for a long time, I think they're over-exaggerating the benefits, I suspect.
It's a good part of the world, though.
Yeah, it's not bad. So, went to school in a southern suburb of Sydney, and then off to the Uni New South Wales to study psychology. Yeah.
And what was the family background? What did the
they
family do?
So my mum, I think early in her career she was a bookkeeper, and then as we all got a bit older she worked in admin in schools. And my dad worked in education his whole life, so that's why we're down in the country to start. And then he worked his way through the education system, ended up being a principal and then a district inspector and things, but did some interesting things on the way through. He was a mathematics consultant, introduced calculators into high schools for the first time. So you remember, I think we're all old enough to remember the Mike Walsh show. He was on the Mike Walsh show with a calculator.
Is that right?
Yeah, saying, this is what we're going to put into schools. Everybody's going, oh, okay. Calculator, good to know.
How good's that?
Yeah, it was pretty good. And then he also worked on in a working party for UNESCO, the United Nations Education Organisation, to help restructure the education system in Thailand in the mid-70s. So we lived in Thailand for a bit. We're told not to wear baseball caps because we look like Americans, and it wasn't all that long after Vietnam had sort of finished and things. So that was, so it was an interesting sort of experiences with him. And then in the end, he became what was known as the first support officer, if you like, for secondary principals, because secondary principals don't really have people that can go and help them out. They're all stuck running their school. So they might have, a kid that unfortunately gets washed away at sea, and then the news turns up and the police turn up and there wasn't anybody to provide peer-to-peer support sort of thing. So he played, the first role in doing that. So they both worked in education pretty much.
So he's a bit of a trailblazer then.
Yeah, he did a number of really good things. At the time, actually went to the federal court with an anti-discrimination case because at the time he wanted to be the principal of a girls' school and he couldn't because he was a guy. So he and two others actually sued the New South Wales Education Department and, changed the system. Yeah, and won. Yeah, based on merit as opposed to tradition and points and so on. Yeah, it's kind of a fascinating time.
So are you smart? Are you like really smart?
I can count without using my hands.
Well, you got a calculator. You got a calculator for every day.
Oh yes, no, clearly not that smart.
But psychology. Why psychology? What was the?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was always fascinated by sport, so something we've got in common, and particularly how they were using non-athletic means, non-traditional means to improve performance. So in part, I was fascinated by the East German Olympic movement who used drugs and clearly cheated. Mm-hmm. But then the inclusion of psychology in sports and performance and that sort of thing. So I started psychology. I never thought I would become a counsellor or work. I've done counselling, had my own practice, and worked with people on addictions and young men coming out in big workplaces and so on. But it was really around sport and performance. Yeah.
And you played a bit of sport as well as a kid, and
I did.
Yeah.
We all played a bit of sport. I was pretty average, but did enough to have a couple of good moments that I still think about now. 2 goals in a semi-final in soccer and a few other things. I played sort of not the top level of cricket, the level below, but as a team we did okay. And I every second year when I was the older kid in the grade, I used to do okay, sort of thing. So I played cricket and soccer, and then which a surprise to lots of people down here in Melbourne, I played footy in Sydney. So I played in a Hawks jersey for a couple of years, so the Heathcote Hawks. So it was a good time to follow. And then when the Swans moved to Sydney, I thought the right thing to do was follow them. So I stopped following Hawthorn, which for about 15 years was a really bad idea.
So what's your favourite out of those three?
I think probably cricket. I enjoyed playing cricket, and I did well at cricket, I think. I probably wouldn't I would not want to be out in the sun 6 hours a day now, I don't think.
A little boring.
Back then, yeah, just a tad.
Yeah.
Yep. And so followed at all science and math subjects before you get into psychology, or was there any business type subjects? Or
no, there's no business subjects. So like through school, I just did whatever subjects that were inflicted on us, basically. I also played a bit of music, so I started playing music a little bit more seriously when I was a teenager. So if you'd ask what was my favourite subject through school, it was actually music all the way through. Did okay. Until we got to the HSC or the VCE exam, when we had to listen to music and the records turned up in the back of a station wagon in the middle of summer, and so our exam was supposed to start at 2:00, but all the records were warped, so we didn't start till 8:00 at night. So it wasn't a great occasion. But then just the maths and sciences, just to get into science at uni, that was all really.
So what music? What did you play an instrument? You look like a saxophone player.
Oh, it's very astute.
Don't you think he looks like a saxophone?
Well, that's handy because it is saxophone.
Is that right? Yeah.
Primarily. So I learnt saxophone. I started when I was 14 or something. Did okay and played in a couple of nice places with a few interesting groups since then. And I taught myself to play guitar just because I can. But I played saxophone for a long time now.
Want to be a rock star?
No. No, I don't want to be a rock star.
Did you ever busk?
I did. It's funny you say. I have a couple of times. A couple of times at uni, I busked as the Blues Brothers. I was the tall, non-fat one. Yes. And my mate was the slightly shorter, more robust guy. But so we used to busk as the Blues Brothers and play Christmas carols.
Yep.
And we're thrown out of Pitt Street Mall because we weren't a string quartet from the Conservatorium. And so we just played near the train stations because everybody's a lot friendlier at Christmas time.
Yeah.
Because they've already had the Christmas parties and all that sort of thing. So I've done it a couple of times. Taken my son busking once or twice.
Did you make a buck?
A couple. He made more money than we did. He had a mild disability growing up and really bad dexterity, but he knew that I'd busk, so he wanted to busk. So we got him an old cornet, little trumpet, and he would sit around the corner near the TAB, and he'd play, and it was terrible, and people still give him money, which is kind of cool. The lady in the tab would bring out $10 every time we went there. So that was good, and people would walk past, and I'd be down the street, just sort of like security. And they'd go, "Oh, is that your son?" I go, "Yeah." I go, "Thanks for supporting." They go, "That's fine." And then we took him up. He goes, "Right, that's really good." So you used to busk in town. I said, "Yeah, I did busk in town once or twice. Can we go to town?" I said, "We're not going to town, but we will go up the street and around the corner where the main shopping centre is, and we'll put you outside the supermarket and see how you go." So we went up there, and he would look at me, and I go, "Now," and he'd just do the same stuff as always, which was nothing. And people put money in, and it's much better busking these days when coins are $2, where back in the day it wasn't so good.
You want the goldies.
And then this lady walked past, and she paid him, which is great, and then she got to me and said, "Oh, thanks for supporting him." She said, "Yeah, no worries." And she said, "Does he know what he's doing?" And I said, "If you're asking can he play trumpet, we all know he can't. And he knows he can't. If you're asking does he know he makes $1 a minute, he knows that, yes." So he was making $60 an hour, just providing value and letting the consumer decide what the value was for them. There'd be parents walk past with their kids who were A-grade athletes, really smart and all those sorts of things, right? Arguably not as helpful around the house or something, because their mums would walk past with them and say, "You should be more like Lachlan." So when you ask about business and things, he was probably the one with the biggest business brain, or he didn't realise at the time. So
yeah, right.
Yeah, it was a fascinating thing. Thankfully, that only lasted like 3 months.
And how was the uni journey?
Uni was really good. It was so I've been to a couple of universities. Originally, it was the University of New South Wales, which is great. Did science psychology there. Played as much sport, I think, as we did. Didn't go to the bar much. We played a lot of sport. We were fortunate. We had a couple of friends. One I'd known for a long time. Another one we met. Girls who were insanely athletic. And the beauty of uni sports in those days within the university, if you had a mixed team, at least with a couple of women, you got a bit of a head start against blokes, right? And these girls in touch footy, you just put them on the outside of a guy and they just disappear, and all their friends would be going, You're gonna chase these people? Like, I did. I tried. I can't. Yeah. And one of them was a state netballer, so basketball was okay, and so yeah, that part of uni was good. Got through okay, and then I didn't really want to be a psychologist at the time. I figured I hadn't done enough laps around the block to be telling people, or at least encouraging people how to change their lives, right? So I didn't become a psychologist. I went and got a job and then did my master's in psych and postgraduate sports and performance psychology, 10 years later or something, 15 years later.
Science psychology, what does that mean?
It's a Bachelor of Science, and then if you studied psychology and did well, you then got automatic entry into a honours program.
Right.
And that then was an easy way to get into full-time psychology as a job, into the master's program and into psychology. It's different now.
Right.
Now the requirements are a lot different, yeah.
Did you learn much doing that course?
I didn't learn enough in the computer science class in the first year, as it turns out, because I got a letter later that year asking me to fill out a survey on depression, and I couldn't work out it was because I failed computer science, or whether I was in the psychology program. The one thing I do remember, statistic, is around the psychology of addictions and cigarettes and so on. There was like 67% of people that go to hospital with cigarette-related cancer start smoking before they leave hospital.
Oh, God.
Yeah. It's quite extraordinary.
So you did become a psychologist straight out of university, but you did end up in the people sense, so working in HR roles, and that led you into the franchising sector. So, working with Yamos at KFC and Pizza Hut, in interesting roles, Asian, being overseas, back, you said you're in Asia as a kid and you're back in Asia as an adult now in senior roles. So how was it being part of that environment,
It was fantastic, actually. It was very fortunate that KFC and Pizza Hut at the time were owned by Pepsi or PepsiCo. So it was called PepsiCo Restaurants International. And then it was called Tricon, because the third concept was Taco Bell, which hasn't really done all that great here for whatever reason, particularly now, given there's a bunch of Mexican chains. And so their processes and systems within the business were fantastic. So everything that we see now in the commercial HR, consulting, talent acquisition, performance psychology space were things that Pepsi had already invested in at the time across their bottling business and their restaurants business and then their snack foods, so they owned Frito-Lay as well. And so the thing that was of most benefit, certainly was an interesting job, number of interesting jobs, but just the processes and systems and the consistency of those from a people development perspective was really the thing that struck me as being outstanding. Because a lot of companies take a performance management system, you decide yours isn't working, so then you put in another one, and they're only ever 80% perfect anyway. And then you put it in for a year and people are still getting used to it and it doesn't go great. Then you try it again in the second year and it still doesn't go great, and then change it again, right? And that in reality is no different to being a psychologist or a sports coach, or trying to get your kids to do the right things around the house, or get your dog to do, it's that decide what the right behaviour is, teach it, reward the right behaviour, correct when the behaviour is not necessarily appropriate. And so there was a lot of parallels between what a psychologist might do or a sports coach might do and what the entire Pepsi business was doing as leaders. So we, for example, in KFC and Pizza Hut down here, we had 140 odd stores. We had 60% casual turnover and 35% management turnover in stores, which meant that all we had time to do was recruit. You could never take the business to the next level because you're spending all your money bringing people in and teaching them the business. Because if you think about it, they come in and they need to learn the job for 6 weeks as a manager of a store.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing 50 of that, you don't have 300 weeks a year. You don't have that ability, right? So somebody made the great decision, and it was probably one of the leaders, in operations, that we would just say to all the leaders in at the store level, all the area managers, we're not letting people leave now. So you can't sack anybody else. Oh, why? But they're hopeless. It's like, well, hang on. First of all, they weren't when we brought them in. They weren't hopeless when we trained them, and now you've got them, and somewhere something's gone wrong. And so we just put in a coaching approach at all levels of the business in retail operations for a period of time. Just said you can't sack people. We're going to try and turn them in. We'll retrain. We'll reteach. And we did all that, and over a close to 3-year period across the business, reduced the casual turnover by 50% and reduced the management turnover in stores from 35% to 17%, which meant you could then have another $250,000 to spend, some of it on leadership development, on succession planning, on a bonus system. There's a lot more discretionary funds then than year on year, just having to go back to finance and the MD and saying, we need more money because people keep quitting, and at some stage they'd have to stop. So the business put in a true coaching, performance psychology approach, if you like, but probably before all those words became popular and, I'm not saying trendy, but yeah, so it was a great business from that perspective.
So 50%, so let's say down to 17, what would you see as an industry average now for staff turnover like that? Do you have an idea on that, or like in an average? There was a massive business, obviously.
And a highly casualised business. So
yeah.
I think it's an interesting one. Broadly around, somewhere between 7 and 10% acceptable turnover. If for no other reason life gets in the way, people still, I think,
shit happens.
Yeah, exactly. Less more than in the past, I suppose. People are on career pathing, and so what the GFC did, we were talking about a business. Lots of businesses before didn't get through the GFC, and what the GFC did was it changed the structure of the workplace tremendously, and it. Life used to be a pyramid. There was most of the jobs at the bottom, but then there were next level roles, middle management role. There's a lot more of a hierarchy you could aspire to develop through, and the large organisations did that really well. Now, because of the GFC, and a lot of people lost their jobs, or a lot of full-time jobs became part-time jobs became casual jobs. So there's been an over-casualisation of the workforce, and so the career pathing doesn't exist in most companies under 1,000 people or something, right? So you're going to get turnover from that perspective too. So there's natural turnover in some industries. The highly casual industries are still going to have high turnover.
Just by the nature of the business.
Yeah, exactly. And because the other thing now is everybody's, back in the day people used to move for two things. One was to get paid more. Because you could kind of hoodwink your employer into thinking paying you $10,000 more was a good idea because they didn't actually know what everybody paid on the other side of town, whereas now everything's commoditised. Everybody knows exactly what everybody gets paid. And the other thing is people moved because they wanted to live closer to home, whereas the GFC took care of that, right? So, it's a really interesting time coming out of COVID to see how many people are now sick of working at home. Like, that's a bit close.
Yeah.
So I think...
So when sorry if I'm interrupting, but so when you're in that role, like what were you actually doing? Are you employing people, or are you developing strategies to hold people, like you said?
Yeah.
What were you? Because how old were you when you were doing this? Is this straight out of uni?
No, I worked for the government for a while before I joined KFC.
Yeah.
Looking after sort of a field learning and ops role, helping to look after sort of the southern part of New South Wales, which was like 50 stores, and then came down here to look after Victoria, Tasmania and South Australia. So my and that was the 140 stores. So my key role was to support the operational leaders and had a team under me across the whole aspect of HR. Making sure we had the right people, making sure we could coach people properly, making sure our learning and development programs were in place, liaising with my peers, and then the employee benefits person based in Sydney to make sure we had everybody paid properly. And so that was still quite a hands-on role. But then we also were launching franchising, single unit franchising at the time. We had some master franchisees in Queensland, as in Collins Foods and Western Australia, Competitive Foods and so on. And then when I became the group HR person supporting roles that I had from a regional perspective, then it's slightly more strategic, make sure, because with that many people and such a high casualised workforce, you can quickly start to spend a lot more money on labour than you've budgeted for. So there was, salary and benefits strategy. This succession planning was a really big part of what the entire business did. It was a great way to put in place opportunities for people to develop. It was a great way to save money on recruitment. It also made sure that when people moved into more senior roles, the Pepsi world and KFC picked up very good at moving people around to pick up different skill sets as well.
So why were they so cutting edge? I mean, they're a massive business. Is it because they're an American business and they did it better, or was it the culture? Why was? I think because that's really ahead of its time.
It was. So there's two things. One, all of those things. All of those things are leader led. So it doesn't matter what the business is. So if the leadership team has decided that we're going to focus as much on people as we are on product, then that's going to happen. But if they don't, it's never going to happen. And then once they decide to do it, you've got to build the systems in place, and you've really got to roll it out and measure it and be really, really consistent. So they were extraordinarily consistent with developing these systems and then rolling them out, not just at a local level but globally. So it was something that they put in place and drove really hard. I think we were fortunate that we were part of the Pepsi business, so they would have invested in a lot of these things as part of the broader Pepsi business in the United States. And at the time, I think it probably was the larger American multinationals that were, focusing on people as much as product and service. But in a sector where you've really only got three things, is you've got bricks and mortar, food costs, and people. It'd be kind of crazy not to try and get the most out of your people.
Big number, yeah.
But it's a hard thing to do, and to do consistently, because it's not a natural behaviour for a leader under pressure, which is for somebody to say, "I've burnt the store down," and just go, let's process. It's not that bad, but let's process that.
And so after Yum, you had a couple of other HR roles at Smith's Snack Foods and the Leading Edge, so smaller businesses. So without the global resources, and what did you learn in those businesses?
A couple of things. So Smith's Snack Foods was bigger than it looked, and they and in the end, the reason I left there is they ended up getting bought by Pepsi actually and merged with Frito-Lay. So they ran in a similar style. The Leading Edge was in essence a startup market research company, and again, as I mentioned before, success in developing people is fundamentally driven by the leader. So they had a great MD, Derek Letty, who was really obsessed about making sure everybody was developed and building a fantastic culture and building the culture from the ground up. So when I joined, there was 17 people. By the time I finished, there was 70 people, and we tried to put in place some of the larger company systems approach, but also some unique cultural and then structural elements to it. So one of the things we put in place was less of a hierarchical structure, but more of a concentric circle structure, where because a lot of the clients were in industry verticals, so non-compete. So you'd have one major bank in the market research company, one major airline, a major insurer, so that you weren't competing. And then everybody typically would be too focused on that client or that sector. And then when they needed them to work in other sectors, they didn't really have the transferable skills. So we put in, because we had the luxury, put in a couple of unique org structures where roughly 20 to 25% of your time would be spent in a client that wasn't your main client base. So that way, if you're an account director, you clearly got transferable qualitative and quantitative skills. So if you were a really good account director in finance, we'd put you into tourism. And initially the clients would think that was a bit strange and just say, look, the reason they're working with you is you've heard of them and they've got these great skills. And to be honest, if your account directors can't help you, this person will know enough about you to kick in and so on. So it was a really good way to work in a business where, again, the leader was very much focused on doing the right thing by people, but then we had to put appropriate systems around it too. It's no point, I'm exaggerating, but getting fancy beanbags and chocolate biscuits and thinking things are going to go okay. You've got to have a process and a system for where you spend your money and how people spend their time, because they're all client-facing roles too. So,
and so after these roles, then you decided to go into psychology, which is what you studied, and then it's so you're working in predominantly sports psychology and but all round psychology generally, and running a business as well as helping people. So how did that come about, and how did you enjoy that?
I had been thinking about that for a while, and I guess I didn't enjoy the late 2000s or the late 90s, early 2000s when. And then the GFC, when companies were restructuring, it just wasn't like I was quite good at it. It wasn't really what I wanted to do. And I had this thing in the back of my mind that at some stage I'd become a sports psychologist too. So coming out of the leading edge at the back end of working there, I did a postgraduate qualification at the Australian College of Applied Psychology, which then qualified me on the back of my master's, which I'd done in between, to become a psychologist. I got on really well with Bruce Wilson, who'd written the programs at the college in sports and performance. So I became sports and performance tutor to support him with the students around the country. And then when he left, I had access to the programs and so on. So through that time, I started to consult myself. So I set up a couple of different practice areas. I had my own counselling practice. I worked for employee assistance providers, so they're companies that provide 5 sessions to large corporates. And because I had a corporate background, I was suitable to dealing with executives. So that was another part of my portfolio. I did some recruitment and HR consulting for smaller companies that I knew as well. But then we built a sports and performance clinic in the CBD in Sydney. Myself, a sports doctor, a podiatrist, and some physiotherapists. And so we had our own private clients in that practice. And then I also used that. I did work at the Conservatorium of Music. So I'm actually a published researcher in sports and performance. It's in a French journal, so you have to take my word for it. But
is that the circulation of 3?
No, apparently it's really big in France. So's Tina Arena. So.
Yeah, well, okay.
And then I had private clients working out of the clinic. I also did work for the New South Wales Institute of Sport, so I ran goal setting and peak performance workshops for what was called their Talented Athlete program, which is people from the ages of 17 to 21. Ran programs for them, did some work for a couple of sporting organisations. So I've proudly got an Australian jersey. Oh. Yeah, I'll bring it in. I don't know where it is. I think I gave it to my daughter. I think she wore it to, I don't know, for some school thing, or she's probably still got it.
For what sport, sorry?
Ultimate Frisbee. It's a sport.
All right.
It's not quite as bad as show jump.
Yeah. Is Ultimate Frisbee where you throw it at people to hurt them?
Yeah, that's right. That's the modern day version. Yeah. That's the one on acid. That's right. They play that down the pub all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
No, so I worked with them before they went to the World Championships. I worked with a very high level women's cricket team to help them win the premiership again, and then some individual clients and so on. So I did that for a couple of years. It was sports and performance psychology still wasn't very well developed at the time, so there wasn't a natural tendency for people to want to pay for sports and performance, and it also wasn't. Unlike now, where as a psychologist with Medicare, you can get 5 sessions. Like an individual can be granted 5 sessions by a GP, for example. It's covered by Medicare. Back then, we weren't covered by Medicare at all. So, and I didn't want to sit in a room doing counselling all day, every day either. So it just didn't. I contributed articles to the AFL. So I think it's several pages back in Google, but the old AFL.com website. I wrote articles for them as under my company of Performance Edge consulting.
So if you're just trying to give me a handle on this, if you're going out to a cricket team, Frisbee team, rugby team, or whatever, and you assess them and see how they are trained and the coach and the CEO of the group or whatever, could you sit down and say, you know what, if we put this team through my program in the next 10 years, I can get a 20% better result? Can you quantify it somehow to say the impact on what you're doing? Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not explaining it very well.
No, I know what you mean. I think it's important. There's a lot of parallels, and I think you're asking before, Bruce, between being an HR leader in a corporate organisation and the sports psychologist for a sporting team. You can assess, put in place programs, you can guide people. At the end of the day, you're not the one that's actually going to be responsible for, like, in terms of HR. The other thing that was really good in the businesses that I worked in is, it sounds a little strange at times, but HR's role is not actually to like everybody all the time. It's actually to make it a better place. And so sometimes that's, if you come and say, whether it's two footballers having a disagreement or a sales manager having a disagreement with the sales director, and they say, the problem is, can you fix it? And the answer is, well, it's not my job to fix it. It's my job to provide information, some development, some coaching, so that you've got the ability to change something in a sustainable and ongoing manner. So a 20-year window, a 10-year window, as sports psychologist, is very difficult to guarantee an impact. But I think if you get enough time and access, then you can definitely have a significant impact. And again, it's about making a difference where it matters.
Yeah.
And again, it's the same with HR in larger organisations as well. There's some things that just aren't going to change, and it's good money after bad. Whereas it really takes an acute understanding of what the drivers are of performance to work out where you should spend the money.
And how that relates to each individual, I suppose. Because
that's right.
I remember an old girlfriend of mine, it wasn't a girlfriend, it was a girl who was a friend who I lived with her, and her older brother is a guy called Mark Patterson. He went to school with him, and he played Australian schoolboys rugby. He was a 5'8", and he was first in cricket, unbelievable talent, and played New South Wales cricket. And he was telling my dad one time, a long story, but telling my dad that he always thought he was really good at sport. And he played against Alan Border one time. And he said he realised the difference between where he was at his level and why Alan Border was such an unbelievable cricket player was when someone was coming in to bowl, you could see on his face there was nothing outside whoever was bowling to him, and total confidence and focus on the ball.
Yeah.
And that's when he realised he will never take the next step, because he didn't have that, whatever you want to call it, sheer bloody mindedness, I suppose. And it's the same in these businesses as well. We've got to work out what will get people to that singular point and what motivates them to get there. Am I talking shit, or is this...
No.
Because I love this stuff.
But it's also understanding what it is that makes the difference.
Yeah.
So something that's really important when it comes to performing well is the ability to quickly assess how you've gone, understand why that is, and then park it. Particularly if you're in the moment, like facing somebody who bowls 150 kilometres an hour. Like if you play a play and a miss, we're all watching it on telly going, yeah, it's great. Like they can't be doing that. They've just got to go, okay. Like they've got to have some way of processing that. And some people aren't great. You can see that, right?
Yep.
Even Novak Djokovic last night in the Australian Open men's final, he plays better. He fires up, gets distracted just enough, and that gets him going. And where the other people, and we're literally just talking about focus at the moment, which is just one part of it all, right? But yet there are players with idiosyncrasies. So Nadal's got all of his. Steve Waugh as a batsman had his own. Steve Smith has them in between shot, like in the middle of a shot. He's got, things going on. But they're all there for a reason. Now, part of it's habitual, and they've decided it worked well in the past. But others might just be cues to get them to stop thinking or stop moving or to refocus. And I experienced this a lot. Fortunate enough to be part of what turned out to be a great martial arts school, and so we spent a lot of time doing martial arts with my family and the kids and so on. And there's parts of that to the outside world which look a little bit weird, right? But when you understand the package and why you might have a ready stance, which is just standing there with your hands on your thighs, feet shoulder width apart, and then doing nothing. Like, doing nothing is actually doing something, right? It just depends where and how you do it. So again, in cricket, some people take their gloves off and put them back on in between every ball, which I think is a little bit of a distraction, but for them it works. And and that just could be something they've worked out. That's all I have to do. Yeah.
It is interesting. Sorry, I'll shut up.
No, it's fine. Well, I guess going into your practice in your psychology practice, so your roles, you've been working in large organisations, you're managing large workforces, and then all of a sudden you're a business owner. So how does they're employed by you, and so all the things you've learnt about dealing with people, you're now going to put that in place because you've now got business partners that your business can fail if that relationship between you and your partners doesn't go well. So how was it being the employer and the business owner?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that there's a saying, there's no such thing as doctor, heal thyself. So when I was a kid, we had 2 doctors in the family practice, a lady who was extraordinarily overweight and a man who smoked like a chimney. And they're both great doctors, right? So, which is kind of cool. But yeah, you're right. As a business owner dealing with people, a couple of things came to mind. I think you often don't spend anywhere near as much time or as much time as you should really understanding the people that you go into business with, and anywhere near as much as you would. There would have been times when I coached people to spend 3 times as much time assessing a sales manager at Pepsi than I probably did assessing my 2 business partners for Sportswise. One of whom we discovered quite quickly, was bound to stitch us up in the end if we had to taken the time to work it out in the beginning. So I think
it did stitch you up, or it didn't?
No, they did.
All right.
Yeah, that's right. They the practice was going great, and we had plans for another couple, and I was looking after all the back end, and which included the lease, and so and I got on well with the leasing agents in the city in Sydney, and one of them called me and said, "Oh, do you know that they're looking for? They've just looked at 3 other spaces, so it's kind of interesting." Yeah, exactly. And as you guys know, as business owners, those sorts of things hit hard and hit quick. Because they're your own business, right? Whereas the luxury of being in a large organisation is there's lots of chaos, and you can actually do good things like almost any time you like, but you can also choose not to get involved because these other people are going to tidy up the mess and things. So the biggest challenge for being a business on your own is, I think, having the right business partners. And what I found is, it's very hard to take the time. Again, in a large organisation, you happen to find time to not work. So if you actually need to talk, I've been in businesses where we had 7 meetings to decide something which could have been done in 10 seconds, right? Whereas with your own business partners in your own small business, and you're working your own practices, if you don't create that time to get to know each other and build the right behaviours and common goals and so on, then it becomes very hard to make that successful. And when one person's circumstances changes significantly, they think their world is about to end, and therefore that impacts on yours. And so, I found it quite different, that small company owner-operated dynamic compared to the larger organisation as well.
And you had business ownership another time, taking your passion for martial arts, which you talked about, turning that into a business. So how did that go?
Went well. So it was like a license, so sort of like a franchise, if you like. So we were an offshoot of my sensei's martial arts school. So we used his system. We co-branded everything, so including the public-facing aspect of it. The uniform was co-branded, so our logo and his logo, and it was actually a really good experience for a bunch of reasons, because I understood franchise. Like, I knew what we were getting into. I could run the business, as in deliver the product because I'd been doing it for 12 years before that, and I'd been teaching and helping him and so on. And it was great. Actually, we started it fundamentally. I guess I wanted a sport-based business, but I also wanted to build a business to support my son, who was probably going to be challenged in getting a mainstream job sort of thing. So he became the operations manager and he taught the kids' classes. And I learned a lot about marketing. I learned it's like a feast or famine thing. If the market's big enough and you lob yourself into the middle of 10 competitors and you're great, that could be good. I learned that I probably shouldn't have opened it where I did. But again, it was part convenience and part, I wanted to be not too far. Got to balance that with the full-time gig. Didn't want it too far from home. And
so you weren't full-time in the martial art. You were doing both.
Yeah, that's right. I was running 70-odd recruitment agencies at the time. And they were nice enough to let me take off a little bit earlier on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And no, we built it up Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then in the end, when I moved down here, I transitioned it. The business to my son, who then ran it with his mum, because we all learnt the same program. So no, I was running both at the same time.
And then again on the people front, recruitment. So you mentioned 70 practice. You had a couple of different roles in recruiting businesses. So
yeah, I guess it was always a decent part of the larger corporate HR roles. So got to find the right people to bring them into the business. Thankfully, we spent more time focusing on retention and coaching and leadership, so we didn't have to spend as much time, but we're always going to have to recruit. I was, around the time I started the sports psychology practice and did some consulting, I then helped a friend rebuild his recruitment business, and he was part of this 70 agency network, if you like, or partnership. And so I transitioned from helping him to having a role in that organisation. So yeah, that's right. So it's a fantastic business model created by somebody else, full credit to them, but we would provide services to large corporates, but we would use specialist agencies. So if you were Qantas and you wanted an IT person and say John had an IT recruitment agency, we'd have John go and service Qantas. We'd go in together, co-branded, our ISO systems, our billing and all those sorts of things. And because you were a business owner and knew what you were doing, you would fill the jobs. So that was our point of difference. So we did that with agencies. I worked there for a number of years. And then they transitioned that business into a debtor finance business, so like a competitor with, say, Scottish Pacific and so on. And so my role was up there because mine was recruitment focused. So then I started my own recruitment agency.
So very much recruitment like a franchise as well. So you've got
that's right. It was a licensing model.
Yeah,
that's right.
Independent business owners.
No, that's right. No guarantee of a feed.
Yeah.
So a little bit of a guarantee of a feed. So they didn't pay anywhere near as much as a large franchise, but they would pay between $10,000 and $15,000 a year on the basis we would provide them with economies of scale on things like advertising and so on. But then we would partner with them to deliver work, and they would keep most of the profit. Yeah, it was a licensing model. I think in a perfect world they would have all carried our brand, but they're all well established and their brands meant more to them rightly.
So just quickly, so how badly could you beat the shit out of me? Like what? What did you get to? Because I've given you some shit over the time.
You have. And I think I've demonstrated.
I might show you a little bit more respect.
I think, to be honest, I've shown you the best of what I've got. I haven't touched you at all.
Well, that's discipline.
And I think it's like it's that ironic thing. The better people are at martial arts, the less they do.
Yeah.
I've never been a big one for, I don't have that much testosterone. I don't. Even when I had to do sparring all the way through, and I really can't fire. I really can't take you apart unless you have a crack at me first, right?
Yeah.
So you're pretty safe, I reckon. Whereas I've had friends in the past that, sure, let's go. I was never part of that. So I was probably ideally suited to modern day martial arts.
So what did you get to? What level was that? Was that the dance?
Yeah. So we've got.
Is it karate or judo or?
It's based on Japanese jiu-jitsu,
Okay.
but it's a sort of a bit of a hybrid now called North Star, based on all of Sensei's studies. So it's a self-defense based system basically, and it starts with nothing flashy. So it doesn't start with anything on the ground, doesn't start with massive kicks or throws or any of that. Because what we want you to do is if you get knocked down, get up.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want you to think you're a Brazilian jiu-jitsu expert and roll around on the ground trying to get the perfect arm bar. Because if you and I are having this blue, right, and he's on my side, you don't know him, he's going to come over and kick you in the head.
Mm.
We're on the ground. I was like, that's not going to work. So, we would do lots and lots of cardio and strength training appropriately. And at times, the only reason we would have a class is just to teach people how to get up.
Okay.
Fall down, get up. That's
Good life lesson.
and then just learn how to break balance. Have this discussion with friends occasionally. They go, right, so you cross the street and you see a couple of people having an argument over there. What are you going to do? Well, go home to my family. I don't need to go over there. I don't need to go over there. So the short answer to your question is enough Dans on our black belts to look impressive in a context where people care. Whereas in reality, but it does have practical applications. So simple as we teach everybody how to fall, including kids the age of 4 and above. So had parents come into class one day and say, I now understand why you do that stuff with the kids at the end of the class. Obviously, they never get hurt. Because one of the kids was running through the playground, tripped up in the air, learned how to fall, didn't bang their head, got up. Other people have used self-defense. And it's that spatial awareness. I'm out with my wife and we had somebody come towards us and she's never seen me do any martial arts, whatever. And he was coming along and I noticed him and I moved the bag and stuff and he was standing right here and looked a bit fired up. And so I just turned my chair and positioned my feet and like in a seated ready stance. And if he was going to do anything, I was just going to be on my feet and see what happened. But it's just that awareness bit sort of thing and just knowing, we're talking before about focus and triggers and all those sorts of things.
Yep.
I think there's a famous Mike Tyson quote, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? That's right. Well, a good plan would be don't find out. It's just, you just don't need to.
And another part of martial arts, which I know you're passionate about, is the mental toughness side of things as well. So whether it be mental toughness in sport, whether it be mental toughness in business, how's that translated across for you and sort of your work in that area? Yeah,
I think I didn't understand it anywhere near as much as I do now before I actually did martial arts. Like before martial arts in business, to your point, am I smart enough to do well? Bit of luck on the way through, ended up in a bunch of jobs that went really well, had some great experiences working overseas and with master franchisors here and in the Middle East and all that sort of thing, right? But I don't think I actually understood the right way to go about stuff until I'd been working for myself and not really done a really good job at it. Had a couple of business partners where, I would have loved sports-wise to have grown. I should have driven that, I think, a bit harder or stepped out and done it myself and so on. And it really wasn't, I think professionally and personally, I rebuilt myself through martial arts. Just going in, so there was a period there where I wasn't getting much work at all, so I was close to unemployed, working for myself. And so we had started martial arts because of my kids, not because of me. And I think the processes and systems and structures that were put in place that are short enough to learn and make progress and to celebrate and then move on, and then the systems around that where you're getting the right support from good senior belts who you can't progress without having coached people and take people with you. So I could see the psychology and the big business part come to life in what to the outside world is a very artificial environment, but it was actually built in almost the perfect way. You just do just enough and then you get rewarded, then learn a bit more and then get rewarded. But just remember that even when you get to be a black belt, you're still you're a black belt in our system and you can teach our system, that's all fantastic. You're not probably going to beat a guy who's got white line fever coming out of a pub. It's just
with 10 beers under his belt.
Just understand.
Not feeling anything.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we've had some meetings with emerging business owners who, and a lot of the clients for BDC don't know what they don't know yet. And I think before having my own business and not doing all that great, and then doing martial arts, and probably occasionally since, there's clearly times when I have to check myself and say, all right, hang on, I think this is good. for me, the biggest challenge is when I think I'm going great, not when I think we get. Like I can work out when things aren't going so well, and that's the easier bit. So I think, is this a great outcome? Is surviving this lot of sparring with a guy who's 4 belt levels below me and scared to bejesus? If I beat this guy, or at least don't let him touch me, that's not a massive moral victory. So I think it's really important, the mix of the large business, the small business, some of the mental toughness, like everybody needs to have a slightly more developed plan in terms of what makes them successful and how they can plot that path.
So based on that, I don't know how much more time we've got left, but based on that and everything that you've done, everything that you've experienced, and since we've started the BDC talent, how do you rate the businesses that without mentioning any names, how do you rate the businesses that we have as clients and that we're talking to? How do you rate them in that talent space, in all encompassing and understanding the animal and what makes them tick and get the best out of them and give them clarity of action and all that stuff? How do you rate them out of 10?
I think one of the beautiful things of what we're trying to do at BDC Partners in general with the types of businesses we're working with is that fundamentally they've all got an insane amount of energy, they've got complete commitment, and they're driving forward. And they're prepared to allocate resources. I just think occasionally they need a slightly different lens. Because I think they could make prior to coming to BDC, I was fortunate enough to work with Franchise Relationships Institute on the relationships between franchisors and franchisees. And I think, and I'm preempting, tips for franchisors and so on. But the relationship part is definitely the most important part. Particularly, whether our clients are franchisers or retailers or emerging businesses, it's not the people that started the business who have to act like they think it's great even on days when it's clearly terrible in the hip pocket or just life in general. But it's that next level down who aren't going to get the buyout, who aren't going to get the equity, the people that, where the rubber hits the road, basically. Field managers, area managers, franchise business consultants, field trainers. If it's a technology-driven business for our clients, whoever the key person in IT is, whoever the key person in procurement is, they all really have to be really attuned to. We're all leaders, but on how to lead and influence, I think that's the most important part. Or how occasionally when to not act like they're in charge. Because at the end of the day, as a franchisor, and you work in head office, you might think you're in charge, but we all know the franchisees are like, if they all go down, it's all over, right? So, and again, it's a pyramid sort of thing. Back when I started with KFC and Pizza Hut, the hardest thing I ever did at the time, we rolled out situational leadership, and I had to teach a whole bunch of restaurant managers around the country to be better leaders. And so we talked about hierarchy and all that, and they're all going, are they going to do this in head office? Like, are they going to be why are you asking us to do this with our teams if they're not doing it with us? And, fundamentally, that's a really important distinction, I think, and you see that in emerging businesses that are driving, that they get some success, then they plateau, and then they go for external help, and then they drive again. But they don't always do the right thing in that second phase as well. So I think the people part more so than ever, and this is not an HR-oriented person saying it, we all know that if something's going bad at a franchise site or in a franchise business, if the franchisee thinks you really care about how they're going and are prepared to do whatever is required, even if it's nothing today, because you were coming for your visit and the place is clearly a mess, and normally it's not. There's got to be ways of adjusting the system to fit people.
It's often with the franchisee-franchise relationship is the culture generally is when people do things when no one else is looking. And so, your culture's as strong as people that will clean up when there's no one else there, or just wait for someone else to clean up. And it's the living the things that are important, living the values. And if the franchisees don't think that the franchisor actually lives the values, they're just telling them what to do all the time, then the system can start to fall down.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I remember we had a franchise when we had Michelle's at Northcote, I think she was, and I was in charge of all the stores, and I'd go around and I'd come in with my little checklist, and I'd go, yep, that's dirty, and think I was very good at what I did. You know, I'd been doing it for long, but and this happened all the time, and I was thinking, okay, I'm trying to get them to a point where everything's nice and clean and well stocked and blah blah blah.
Sure.
And she said to me one day, "Is you come in here and just throw rocks basically and just shit on me, and then you leave. Is there anything that I'm doing right?" And it really rocked me, because I thought, you are so shit at your job that I just missed the whole point of that role. And it's funny that I was doing such destructive work by just coming in and being negative all the time. That I remember that so clearly to this day, that it really hit home that I was missing it.
Yeah, and look, that's a good observation. And the tendency when you're under pressure and time, Paul, we talked to Rebecca from Zoracle Profiles, which is a magnificent assessment tool that we obviously now use with franchisees and with senior teams as well, which is great. Talking to Rebecca about her early career, even now, as a field manager in real estate in California, had like 150 franchisees. It's like, you haven't got time for a chat.
Yeah.
Got to turn up, fill in the form, get the heck out of Dodge. It's like, and that's the system. But you can plan for all that. Like, if we want to have a culture in a business and you have to build in the time for that. I remember back at KFC and Pizza Hut, marketing, you have a great product and test it all out. And it's all going to happen, and we're going to do a test market on Tuesday, and we're going to roll it out, and then get to the weekend, and occasionally the uptake wouldn't be great for the new product. But 30% of the workforce hadn't worked yet. So they weren't taught, because they don't work Monday through Thursday.
Yep.
They turn up on Friday and do what the customers do, and forgive my back, but they look at the menu board and go, yeah, we do have those. Yeah. We do sell those.
I think we do.
And so you can build all those things, like you have to build that time in.
But it's probably another podcast, but it also comes down to when you're setting up the financial model for your franchise system, that you got to make sure you have enough support on the ground within the model to provide that support that gets the most out of the franchisees. And you're not doing 25, 30 shops in a month. You're doing 12 to 15 to really have an impact. Anyhow.
Well, we're just about out of time, but thank you very much for being part of Tell Us Your Effing Story.
Oh, my pleasure.
The people aspect of franchising is obviously so important. So, your wealth of experience across all different roles from psychology to recruitment, it's been great to listen to. So, thank you very much, John.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir.
I'll get back to you later.